Good morning, President Whitman, trustees, Kirkland and Hamilton alumni, and friends. Thank you to my co-analyst, Carol Goodman Kaufman, our reunion committee, the Hamilton staff who assisted us, and my husband, Edward Krumeich, Hamilton 72, who gave me a great deal of support as we prepared this. Thank you to our classmates whose survey responses provided the memories that brought the Hill of 1970 to 1974 back to life. President Samuel Babbitt remarked in his book, Limited Engagement, that Kirkland grew out of the vision of Robert McEwen, who served the Hamilton, as Hamilton's president for over a decade. The founders of Kirkland, in planning the college in the early 1960s, intended to meet the needs of young women who they assumed would become housewives, pursue independent study, and remain home until their children were grown. Marjorie McEwen, Robert McEwen's wife, and an early supporter of Kirkland, explained that young women needed to be more flexible, more able to meet varying kinds of conditions in their lives than men. How different from the 1960s model of Kirkland women is the reality of Kirkland alumni today. Our class of proud, independent women followed their passions and shared their intellects and talents in many different fields. Cassandra Harris, a community organizer and musician, explains, "We went to a women's college with intention. We were travelers through an uncharted time of revolution and change, and we knew we were doing much of that change. We did not live our mothers' futures. We sang our own, bold and brave and beautiful yet to come." Ours was the third full class to matriculate at Kirkland College. Many of us were swayed to look at Kirkland by an article in the New York Times about this new, small, liberal arts college for women being constructed in an apple orchard across the road from Hamilton College. We trekked up to Clinton to interview with Director of Admissions Carol Walker or Admissions Officer Ginger Miller. Connie Miner, who works now in finance, recalls that she had to step over a dog to enter into Ginger's office. Her father said he couldn't believe the gales of laughter that came out of the office during the interview. The presence of a dog at Connie's interview was not surprising. Dogs roamed freely about the campus and got into all kinds of mischief. We were drawn to Kirkland by smaller classes, evaluations rather than grades, favorable faculty-student ratio, and self-governance in an environment that supported women. As Judith Crown, a journalist, observes, Kirkland and Hamilton encouraged us to be curious, skeptical, dig deeper, persist, and not take no for an answer. Values I've tried to carry permanently and professionally. Kirkland's unique architecture, so different from the classic halls and quadrangles of Hamilton, reflected the mission and modernity of Kirkland. The dorms, designed by the American architect Benjamin Thompson, think cement walls, waffle ceilings, bright-colored blinds, and Marimekko fabric, were not complete when we arrived on campus. We were assigned to triples in the original dorms, Major, Minor, and Macintosh, that housed classrooms, faculty apartments, conference rooms, kitchens, and lounges. A lone payphone sat on the first floor. As the new suite buildings were finished, then known as A and B, and now called Milbank and Babbitt, we lived with members of other classes. Students often would arrive in the morning classes on the first floor of their dorm in pajamas, robes, and slippers. Among the many beloved architectural features of the Kirkland campus were the iconic rock swing in McEwen and the Red Pit in Kerner Johnson. The Red Pit was a magnet for college meetings, poetry readings, and events, including the Kirkland Assembly. Rebecca Eddy, now a money management advisor, took part in a project in a course taught by Doris Friedensohn that surveyed students and lobbied the Assembly successfully for the establishment of a co-op dorm that exists to today. The early 70s were marred by the Vietnam War, and anti-war activism flourished on many campuses, including ours. Maria Zamet, who pursued international relations, remembers counseling students on the draft. Megan Charlotte, who became a community organizer, and Peggy Farber, an attorney, set up a table to encourage students to write to their congressman to protest the bombing of North Vietnam. Other national events influenced our lives. When the so-called plumbers broke into the Democratic National Committee's offices at the Watergate and Congress investigated the abuses of the Nixon administration, Washington ethics became the campus cause célèbre. The editors of The Spectator urged all students to register to vote. Despite the prevailing anti-Nixon mood on campus, he won against McGovern in a landslide. Crisis in the Middle East affected campus life. The Yom Kippur War in 1973 triggered the OPEC oil embargo, and skyrocketing fuel costs caused the campus to shut down during winter study. Representative Julian Bond addressed us about the civil rights movement at the Ruth Jessup Lecture Series. After students lobbied for change to support racial and ethnic diversity, the Black and Latin Student Union was provided a dedicated house where minority students could congregate. Music seemed to be everywhere. Although the Beatles had formally disbanded in 1970, cuts from their albums and hits by other musicians blared from loudspeakers hanging from dorm windows. Kirkland students favored a new genre of music with the voices of women. Carole King, Judy Collins, Diana Ross, Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon, Bonnie Raitt, and Linda Ronstadt became musical icons for our generation. The Student Entertainment Committee invited live acts to perform on campus, including Sha Na Na, the Youngbloods, Livingston Taylor, the Byrds, Tom Rush, John Prine, the James Cotton Blues Band, the Robin Kenyatta African Music Ensemble, as well as the ever-popular Hamilton-based band Steak Night. Many of our classmates reminisced about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Ashton Applewhite admits she spent a lot of her time on the Hill stoned. And her exposure to psychedelics and other recreational drugs remains important in her life. It may partly explain her later success under her pen name, Blanche Knott, the author of the Truly Tasteless Jokes series of books. No doubt, Ashton's Kirkland experience fueled her activism, expressed in her recent book, This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. Nancy Levine, a manager of environmental engineers, whose favorite spot on campus was the pub, remembers getting stoned every night after leaving the library. Van Guido's, a spring bacchanalia, took place in the Kirkland Glen. Liz Horwit recalls that after long, snowy winters, Van Guido's was where students gathered in a field, got drunk and stoned, and danced to rock and roll. Much of the social life at Kirkland and Hamilton revolved around fraternities, which were alive and well during our years on the Hill. Sarah Gordon, now an attorney in London, reminisces about the Emerson Literary Society's 11 o'clocks, where she and others stopped by for snacks on the way back from the library. Sarah adds, the peanut butter and jelly was filling, but cold lasagna hit the spot. Anne Levinson and Maria Zamet were among the first female members of the ELS, which not coincidentally was the same fraternity of Anne's future husband, Peter Brown. Fraternity house parties were fun and left many of us exhausted by Sunday afternoon. Missy Fast, a special ed teacher, proudly remembers attending every house party for all 4 years and claims she had a great time at all of them. But then Missy also writes, a few of us were mad that the Hamilton men took roles to women's colleges like Cazenovia and Skidmore, since we thought Kirkland women were smarter and more interesting. So a few of us took a role to Colgate. I don't think we met anyone, but we were making a statement. On non-party weekends and too many weekdays, we socialized at the pub or at off-campus bars known by their nicknames like The Rock or The Shoe. There was also the Kirkland Coffee House for non-alcoholic breaks. Root Glen and Kirkland Glen were favorite places to experience the outdoors. We walked, ran, cross-country skied, snowshoed, and for one classmate, Jane Irwin, practiced the bagpipes. Anne Levinson, a biologist, prepared for her future life in Alaska by being a member of the outing club. Anne also recalls diving out of the second-floor window of her dorm into a huge snowdrift, and then going back to do it all over again. When warm days and nights came at last, some students swam in the college and town reservoirs. Melissa Dreyer, a journalist, describes an incident in which 8 Kirkland students and 1 Hamilton student were arrested for skinny dipping in the town reservoir. The students were taken before a judge who rendered his verdict. He ordered all 8 Kirkland students to pay a fine of $25, but the lone Hamilton student didn't have to pay any fine. The judge reasoned the Hamilton student didn't deserve a fine if he could convince 8 women to take off their clothes. With the support of Kirkland, we explored the issues that faced women in the 70s, Gloria Steinem co-founded Ms. Magazine in 1972, and in 1973, the Boston Women's Health Book Collective published Our Bodies Ourselves, which we devoured. Florence Howe spoke about feminism in literature, women's studies. We sang along with Helen Reddy's anthem, I Am Woman, and attended a concert of the all-female group Lavender Jane that Lise Rosenthal called a revelation. After the Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade in 1973, recognizing that contraception and abortion are, in fact, health care, the college brought in Planned Parenthood to run clinics at the infirmary. They also hired a clinical psychologist to serve both Kirkland and Hamilton students. Fran Dunwell recounts that choir director James Fankhauser used to show the young male singers a Playboy centerfold before the opening note of each concert to get them to laugh and relax. When Kirkland women joined the choir, the pinups disappeared. With the choir now co-ed, friendships between genders flourished. In 1973, we cheered when Billie Jean King defeated Bobby Riggs in a tennis match popularly known as the Battle of the Sexes. Women's athletics were becoming more widely accepted. Although Title IX had not been signed into law until 1972, Comfort Richardson was, as Sam Babbitt described her, a one-person athletic department. Richardson encouraged us to join various teams, soccer and field hockey, tennis and paddle tennis, and found equipment and space commandeered from Hamilton's athletic department. Missy Fast played jungle hockey and helped launch the first women's hockey team. Missy remembers playing goalie in figure skates and losing their first game to Colgate 6-0. We also supported Hamilton teams. A number of Kirkland students marched in the Aaron Burr Lucky Shop Marching Kazoo Band during halftime at Hamilton football games. Kirkland women could be found at every hockey game in Sage Rink. Cross-registration increased our access to the faculty of both colleges. Some faculty members stand out in our memories. Fran Dunwell, an environmentalist, praised her anthropology professor, Douglas Raybeck, and other faculty on both sides of the Hill who worked collaboratively. The first Earth Day was in 1970, and students became conscious of environmental harm from human activity. Fran met a classmate, Carol Lee, at Yale School of Forestry, and both dedicated their careers to protecting the environment, and in particular, the Hudson River. Jane Irwin recounts a class at which Raybeck spoke only the language of Malaysia. The students were trying to figure out matrio-patrial lineages using questions that required only yes or no answers. If the student messed up and asked an open-ended question, Raybeck would answer the student in Malay. Kristen Howard, a financial analyst, mentioned a memorable quote from the botany professor George Putala, who declared, "Start anywhere on the quilt of life, and once you discover the pattern, you will see the whole quilt." Many classmates mentioned Fred Wagner of the Hamilton English department as an outstanding professor. As Paige Adams, a curator, recalls, Wagner was an amazingly good teacher, guiding us by the Socratic method and dealing gently and with humor with students' questions, disagreements, and occasional bewilderment. Wagner often said, "What do you think it means?" to draw students into a discussion. Kathleen Smith, an artist, recounts that Ed Barrett and Fred Wagner cornered her at a cast party and convinced her to go on the January London Theatre program, where they saw 23 shows in 20 days. Kathleen quickly learned that if you got down to breakfast early, you could sit with Wagner, which was always special, to discuss the previous evening's show. The first evening, they saw the original production of Equus from front row seats, which provided an up-close and personal experience of on-stage nudity. The biggest surprise was the original production of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, starring Tim Curry in black fishnet stockings and high heels. Jane Irwin, our class bagpiper, who became a live sound engineer, recalls her advisor, Ursula Sybil Colby, a professor of literature, greeting her with, "Come into my parlor," said the spider to the fly. Peg Reed, a landscape architect, also had Colby as her advisor and stated that she learned life lessons from her. "She taught me to hold my head high and stand up for myself." According to Sam Babbitt, Bill Rosenfeld was the ringleader of a faculty-student poetry reading group. As professor of creative writing, Rosenfeld fostered many students' interests in creative writing, and a number of our classmates are now authors and poets. Nancy Avery, a prolific published author, was inspired by poetic evenings with Sam Babbitt and Bill Rosenfeld. Nina Bogan, a poet, also cited Bill Rosenfeld and Denise Levertov, along with Hamilton professor Ivan Markey, as memorable professors. Aspiring artists enjoyed long hours in the List Arts Center with the arts faculty, including Bob Muirhead, who taught printmaking, and Bob Paluski, who taught ceramics and glass blowing. Francine Lapani, an educator, remembers the dark room in List, where she could lose herself in the silence until the wee hours of the morning, watching the magic of emerging photographs. Francine says she can still smell the aroma of the liquid developer in the dark room. Joanne Papanek served on the chapel board and was inspired by Joel Tibbets, the Hamilton chaplain, to attend Harvard Divinity School and become a hospital chaplain. Sharon Honig pursued a master's degree in Jewish education and became an ordained cantor. Liz Horwit, a freelance journalist, was an actor with the Charlatans in the spring production of Dark of the Moon and remembers a vagrant bat fluttering around the foyer, greatly adding to the show's ambiance. Liz and a number of Hill thespians, including Karen Katz, joined a summer stock program at the Ring Around Playhouse, directed by Bob Harper in Sturbridge, Mass. Karen, a library administrator, thinks it was a great group of Kirkland and Hamilton students doing all kinds of plays for truly appreciative local audiences. Long before there was a Hamilton streaking team, an anonymous Kirkland student donned a ski mask and apparently nothing else and streaked through the chapel during an assembly of delighted Hamilton men. As a sequel, during a class and charter day stunt, the now closed streaker smashed 3 whipped cream pies in the face of Jim Kennedy, the assembly moderator, because she said he was the only person who had a full frontal view of her when she streaked the chapel. Robin Leslie waxes poetic about the life at Kirkland. The salt-dashed light crunch of the snow underfoot, the beauty of the rural landscape, bike riding on car-less country roads, walking to the bakery late at night, drinking cider fresh from the cider mill, Root Glen, the ancient chapel across the street, practicing compacting my body into a ball in case the waffle ceiling fell down on me. The tiered classroom where we lounged instead of sitting in chairs, the rock swing, the dogs that wandered through the dining hall, my double credit senior project, and spending 17 hours a day running rats through experiments and napping in the overstuffed chair in the psych lab. Gothic Lit, volunteering at the state mental hospital in the children's ward, working harder because we got evaluations instead of grades. My independent study in children's book illustration with Natalie Babbitt. My winter study course in which we framed walls and put in plumbing and wiring and drywall. Kirkland taught me how to properly wield a hammer. Hamilton had been publishing The Spectator since 1848, when the publication board elected me as the next and first female editor-in-chief in spring 1972. I did not know until years later that 3 Hamilton students, student body president Jerry Ryan, publications board chairman Terry McAvery, and then editor-in-chief Fred Axelrod, were summoned to New York City to explain to Coleman Burke, the long-standing chairman of the Hamilton Board of Trustees, why I, as a Kirkland student, was the best person to become editor-in-chief of the Hamilton newspaper. Apparently, they were persuasive because I assumed the editorship of The Spectator that spring. At The Spectator, we face many of the same journalistic challenges that professionals faced, including when to run a story. We had received a tip that Hamilton president John W. Chandler was on the short list to become president of Williams College, where he had been the dean of faculty. When I interviewed him, President Chandler asked me to delay publication of the story and promised to give The Spectator the scoop if he was offered and accepted the job. I agreed, and true to his word, The Spectator broke the story that President Chandler was leaving Hamilton for Williams. Years later, out of the blue, John Chandler, then in his 90s, tracked me down and thanked me for that act of kindness. We graduated on May 24th, 1974, under the tent in the field behind the dorms during a driving rainstorm. Selma Burkham, an English and American literature professor at Kirkland, was selected by our class to give the commencement speech. And of course, there was an open microphone. Little did we realize at graduation what the future would hold or envision the paths our lives would take. Our class has traversed the world, and some of us have settled in distant states and foreign lands. Many of us would go on to careers unrelated to our majors or change careers midstream to follow our passions. Carol Goodman, a psychologist, then a criminologist, went on to become an author whose most recent book, a mystery novel, has just been published. The award for most postgraduate degrees, however, goes to Marilyn Hover, who earned a Juris Doctor, master's degrees in international law, business, and tax, became a certified massage therapist and kinder music teacher, and was awarded yet another master's in counseling psychology. Kirkland College matriculated students for only 10 years. Our 4 years were right in the middle of its lifespan. Kirkland was a short, life-altering experience, like the recent solar eclipse, when the moon briefly obscured the sun, creating an aura of fleeting beauty during the totality of the eclipse, which observers professed was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. The totality of Kirkland College was brief, but Kirkland left its unique and beautiful aura on the hill that is still visible today. Kirkland changed Hamilton forever, for the good, and still lives in our hearts. Kirkland everlasting. Thank you.